Hi there, I'm Morris Partee with Squirrel Trench Audio, and in this series of videos I'm explaining some of the tips, tricks, techniques that I use to remix a number of Beatles songs and audio creations of theirs into a brand new remix called Somehow Someway, which serves as the foundation for my girlfriend's dance routine. The dance routine will be performed by a top nationally recognized dance studio at a number of regional competitions in the Northeast as well as at nationals in the summer. So in this section of the video I'm going to explain what I did to the ending of the song. Now, the Beatles, when they first started recording back in the early 60s, the techniques of the technology available to them was really primitive compared to today's standards. And not only that, when they were making their recordings, they were trying to optimize it for the environments in which it would be listened to. And that meant doing it in mono, and that also meant not putting very much bass into the songs, because a lot of bass could actually overheat people's amplifiers and take away from the mid-range of the audio signal, which is where our ear is most sensitive to. So the ending of the medley is "I Want to Hold Your Hand," and while audio professionals who are amazing at what they do have tried to restore "I Want to Hold Your Hand" to maximize its audio fidelity, there's still a lot missing compared to, I'm sure, how that song sounded in the studio when the Beatles first did it. And the thing which most jumps out at me is the lack of bass and low end. So what I decided to do, and to some people, to purists, this will sound like a complete sacrilege because I am not a musician on any par with the Beatles. But this is for a dance remix, so I decided, you know what? I'm going to restore that low end myself. I am going to actually put in and play and line up some kick drums. I even added some snare because that's pretty well lost in the original recording as well, and the bass, and quite frankly, the bass line is the bass line isn't lost, but the low end of the bass, those low frequencies, they just aren't there. So let me play for you the original section of "I Want to Hold Your Hand" that I'm using in this medley remix.
Oh yeah, I'll tell you something.
So that's the "I Want to Hold Your Hand" that we all have, know and love and have heard. So the first thing that I wanted to add was the kick drum. So I actually played the kick drum via my synthesizer, and after I played it in using the best rhythm that I could, I then carefully lined up any of my kick drum hits that were slightly off. So here is what that kick drum sounds like by itself. Pretty interesting, right? It's not exciting by itself, but added in to the original, it gives that really solid kick drum that is lost in the original recording. Now, if you know anything about audio editing, and you're following along on the kick drum track right here, you might be wondering, why are there just these little dots on this track when you can see sort of a more normal audio file that we're used to here? And I want to explain why that is. These are MIDI notes, and MIDI notes tell the computer when to play their notes. So you can see these are nicely lined up in rhythm. And the sound that you're hearing for this kick drum, it's not just some random any old kick drum. It's actually Ringo's own kick drum, which I sampled from earlier in the song. There's a song on Abbey Road called "The End," where that's the only time that Ringo ever did a drum solo that's recorded on a Beatles album. And so, in the course of that drum solo, you can hear the kick drum by itself very nicely. So I took just that little tiny sample of Ringo hitting his kick drum, and then used that sound to then reinforce where the kick drum goes in "I Want to Hold Your Hand." So here's how those two things sound together. So that's sounding really great. I love how this is sounding so far. However, the only downside to that is now we can totally hear the kick drum very well, but where's that snare? I can't hear the snare anymore. So I knew that. Or the balance between kick drum and snare. It's like if you can hear a kick drum that clearly, you should be able to hear the snare cracking really loudly too. So it's like, all right, if we're overdubbing, if we're adding kick drum in, we've got to add the snare in too. So let me play. So again, same technique. I used my keyboard controller to record when those snare hits happen. So here is a sample of the snare going. So again, it doesn't sound amazing by itself. It's sort of strange, but if you do it with the kick drum, it starts to make a little bit more sense. So you start to hear the structure of the song with it in there. So I basically did the same thing with the claps. I didn't want those to get lost either, so I recorded claps in. And you see that on these two tracks. And then the last part of the equation, with the bass was really tricky to get it to sound the way I wanted in this piece. And what I wanted to do was really keep the low end thump in, because the high end of what Paul played on the bass is present in the recording. It's the low frequencies that we're missing. So in order to do that, not only did I apply a decent amount of EQ to roll off a lot of what's going on in the high frequencies. This is all taking high frequency stuff out. I also ran my synthesizer bass, because that's the only, unfortunately, that's the only bass source that I have. Again, we have very limited time and budget here. I'm not going to bring in a bass guitarist to record it. That would be ideal. But I did run my synthesizer's bass through basically it's actually a guitar preamp, but I tried a whole bunch of different amps out to find one once I found this one right here, it's like, oh, this sounds cool. I really like the sound of it. And more importantly, it fit. This running it through this amp simulator made it feel right within the whole track, and that is, again, looking for the low frequencies of the bass to sit under whatever everything else that was going on in the track. So, even as much as I think that sounds okay almost, that absolutely sucks in comparison to what the Beatles did, of course. However, it does sound good as support to what the Beatles did. So if I unsolo each of these tracks individually, it does make sense within the context of the whole piece. So here it is all together. And there you have it. That is the I Want to Hold Your Hand section of Somehow Someway.